Coogs House. The Willie Fritz era is here on Saturday, and we've got a fun way to break this one down.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, today's podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater that came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. If you want to join in the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below as we play UNLV this week, Vegas, gambling, cards, what your favorite card game was growing up. I was a spades guy. And we can talk about red twos versus black twos and who's wild and who's not and all that kind of stuff. House rules are house rules. I love playing spades. And my guest today, Steve Helwick. Steve, I got to ask before we get too far, what card game did you grow up playing?
I remember every week in high school, you could get exempt from finals if you had good enough grades or attendance numbers to fulfill the needs there. And the one game that everyone my age played was Presidents. If I had to play it right now, I wouldn't know exactly how to play it. But I remember we just had a good time always playing Presidents in school growing up. So that game, and also I think it was called ERS, the one where you slap the sandwiches and doubles. That was always just a fun, quick game to play. So those are some of my card games. Require some less thinking than some poker and all that. So
I've lost plenty of money in poker, and I have some regrets, but that's okay. So Steve covers Houston beat writer for Underdog, covered a bunch of different things about college football, actually. And so I appreciate, taking a break in your schedule to talk about the University of Houston. And I know that's something close to your heart, too. I don't mean to say that's just like the University of Houston's out there. But you've been covering this beat for a minute now. I believe you said 2019?
Yeah, 2019 is when I first came on. I remember kind of middle of the season. My first game was at Houston SMU game on a Thursday night. It was a pretty good back and forth game. I know SMU won. That was a rough season for Houston, but it was kind of cool kind of seeing those losses materialize to wins in that 2021 season and seeing them get 12 wins there. And that was definitely the best season I covered. That had the Marcus Jones touchdown, the Birmingham Bowl win over Auburn. So there have been some good moments for Houston over the years. And one thing I'll plug is the Hail Mary against West Virginia last year. You've probably seen the video now if you're a Houston fan. That was me right behind that Vinny Johnson catch with the video. I think it's my pinned tweet still. So if you want to see that end goal again, just click on my profile and you'll go see that.
That's at S_Helwick on X, Twitter, whatever you call it. That's the pinned tweet. So Steve, you've been covering this beat for a minute. We could talk about the roller coaster you've seen in that 5-6 year window a lot, I'm sure. But I want to talk about this last, I think, upward trajectory of that roller coaster. Willie Fritz gets hired 8 or 9 months ago at this point. Vibes are different, to say the very least. What have you noticed as maybe a difference you didn't expect?
I think the fans have really been on board with this hire. I wasn't around the Houston beat when the moment Dana Holgorsen got hired. I was still in college at that time, but it just seems like the vibes are high. I know he had his first radio show at Little Woodrow's tonight. I saw it was pretty good, a well-attended show with fans dressed in Cougar gear there. The spring game, I know it was held at the Carl Lewis, the track complex. They still had pretty much every single spot full there. So the fans are really on board with Willie Fritz early. And I mean, he's a guy that the Tulane fan base really rallied around the past few years. He had 8 seasons at Tulane, started out taking Tulane from a perennial cellar dweller to a bowl team. And then by year 7 and 8, he had Tulane as a complete juggernaut, winning 23 games in 2 years with the Green Wave. So I think fans are excited about Willie Fritz. And I think one thing they're really excited about is how good of a representative he's been for the city of Houston so far. Fritz has really emphasized being visible in the city throughout the time he got hired in December until now. He's making all these appearances. He opened the gate for Calf Scramble at the rodeo. He's throwing first pitches at Astros games. So Willie has really made himself visible in the city. And I think that's something fans like, because I've covered Big 12 Media Day in Las Vegas. I was just talking to people at the Bellagio pool, telling them what I do covering Houston. And there was someone there who went to Texas State who says, oh, I like Houston because they're really representing the city well lately, and they like the uniforms last year, the Love You Blue. The way to win over Houston fans is you rep the city, because a lot of people have city pride, and you saw the Texans even do that with their uniforms this offseason.
Well, and it's funny because I guess there is a portion of the university that's not directly affiliated with the city. They come down to go to school and then they leave. But most people either use it as an excuse to move to Houston or use an excuse to not move out of Houston, right? That's kind of what the U of H turns into. And then it's like you become a passionate fan, you grow into this, et cetera. Or you have kids like myself and they grow into passionate fans. My real thing I think is interesting about Fritz, though, is I knew he was a good football coach. And I knew that Tulane loved him. They spoke so highly, like their fan bases, their message board spoke so highly of him. I don't mean this pejoratively. I did not know a 64-year-old football coach who spent his entire life in the sun coaching football would have this much energy. He's got a ton of energy. Is there a moment or a thing he said? Is there something that stuck out to you? It's like, oh my God, who is like this guy's like buzzing?
I remember the very first spring practice I attended. I was wondering who was on the mic, like at practice. Like that's Willie, because I've covered his press conferences before at Tulane, writing some of the AAC. Like he's a completely different person. He attacks with so much energy, and the players seem to like it so far. And that yelling "Coogs don't beat the Coogs" every time there's a pre-snap penalty, instilling that into his team, instilling that culture. But yeah, he attacks practices with a lot of energy, which is really impressive for someone who's been in the business this long.
I mean, I would think at this point, a lot of coaches in their mid 60s are thinking more about like being a glorified CEO of sorts, right? They're going to have great assistants, and his son's on staff. They've got great assistants, right? But they're going to delegate. And he's like, he is in it, man. He is full on in it. You mentioned you've been covering practices and out there a lot. And I opened with that the vibes have changed and shifted. I think that's been pretty well documented. What's impressed you at practice? What has stuck out as far as like this year's camp was different, this is going to work, et cetera? What's noticeable?
I think the defensive backfield is a position group that I just notice looks good in practice. And this was a team that finished, I think, 117th in passing defense last year. And that 2021 season aside, pass defense has been a big struggle for Houston over the past few years. But this is a team that's a really good mix of guys they got from the transfer portal and guys who have already been here. I mean, you look at the safety depth chart, you have 6-7 guys that I think that you'd feel comfortable playing. And Willie Fritz did say that they're going to play as many guys as basically any team in the country for these first 3 weeks before really figuring out a rotation and settling on a final depth chart. So I think that the safety room's super deep, where you look at the first team, you look at the second team, you look at the third team going up against these different offenses, and they all look pretty good in the defensive backfield. Latrell McCutcheon's one player. He hasn't played it down at Houston yet. He's somebody who spent the entire last year honing his skills, where he said he could have just BS'd every rep, but every rep was a chance to get better, and he really took that to heart. Then you have just other transfers, Kentrell Webb, Hershey McLaurin, Tegan Wilk. These are guys that started at their former programs, all joining the safety room here. Then guys that other players have said have gotten better this offseason, and Jawan Gaston and Noah Guzman, who had an injury and missed the majority of last season. So I think that safety room, especially, and the secondary just is the most noticeable change this year in a unit that's improved.
I'll talk about the secondary in a second very specifically. And I want to talk about actually the interactions you've had with Latrell specifically, because I agree that it's a room that needed improving and might be the best room as far as position rooms go on the defense. But first, we talked about energy and Willie Fritz and everything. And if you need some energy these days, I'm going to recommend 5-Hour Energy as a pick-me-up. Now, I mentioned I teach, I coach, I talked about the Coogs every day. I don't get a whole lot of sleep. I want to try and get by on low sleep or need a little bit of extra energy just to get past that after lunch, sluggish feeling we all get. 70% of people actually scientifically, that's a real number, right? 5-Hour Energy can help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. Now, they have options with zero sugar. It's convenient, portable size that is perfect for a pick-me-up, helps you get stuff done. A bunch of different flavors. I'm a fan of grape. They got watermelon, tropical burst, berry. So you got to try them all. All you got to do is go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use our promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. The offer is only valid through September 30th on one order, cannot be used on promotions or subscriptions. That's 5energy.com, promo code locked on CFB for 20% off. Go to 5energy.com today. Joined again by Steve Helwick, beat writer for the Houston Cougars. I got to ask you about the secondary. We alluded to this room being strong. I feel like it might be the strongest room on the defensive side of football right now. I also know as I look at it, there's a whole lot of those TR letters next to their name, meaning transfers, right? Whether it's Latrell and AJ that transferred in last year, right? Johnny Carter, Kentrell Webb transferred this year. Juwan Gaston came in from junior college at the December mark of the year. Was that December of 23, January, or December 22, January 23 window? A lot of guys that are really new here. You spent some time with Latrell. What in that conversation, that workout with Latrell McCutcheon, did you get as far as an understanding of this secondary?
Oh, for Latrell personally, he's somebody who just was itching to play so badly last year, where he's on the sideline saying, I could have made that play. He just wanted to be on the field, and transfer eligibility rules at the time prevented him from playing after spending time at Alabama and USC. He would have been a third school without a degree, which was barred by the NCAA. So, but he risked his entire season to come back to Houston and play with his brother Latrevion. So, and he's really amped up to take the field this year. I mean, he's tall, long, fast, and the coaching staff and some of his teammates have said he's been one of the MVPs so far throughout spring ball and then fall camp. So I think having Latrell McCutcheon as a cornerback could be very vital this year. And one thing you do have to note about the defense is you lose Malik Fleming and Isaiah Hamilton last year. Those guys were the turnover machines. They forced 7 of Houston's 9 interceptions all year. And actually the other 2 interceptions, Traylon Payne and Malik Robinson from the linebacker spots, those guys are gone too. So not a single interception returns. So Houston really needs to have some corners that are able to force turnovers, because they forced so much at the beginning of last year in that UTSA game. Those turnovers won them that game, Malik Fleming specifically. And they only finished the year with 9 interceptions after getting 3 in the opener. So they're going to have to really value the ball and taking away that ball on a regular basis. But yeah.
You mentioned the corners having a big duty, filling some big shoes metaphorically. Obviously, Latrell is actually much bigger than Malik. In transitioning somewhat, not very seamlessly because I'm an awkward talker. Latrell probably has the most difficult job this weekend. He's covering Ricky White, who, I got to be honest, when they scheduled this game, I would have thought a player like Ricky White would have transferred out of UNLV to go get an NIL bag somewhere, right? Like I just didn't think he'd be on the roster this fall. He's a pro. He will be an NFL football player. Latrell's got to cover him. I'd imagine that's his markup, but he's a future NFL football player at the wide receiver spot. UNLV runs what's called the go-go offense, and for folks that are maybe, figuring out the X's and O's kind of things, think speed, think fast, think big play. They're going for big plays a lot. What do you think the secondary will look like this weekend against UNLV with new quarterbacks, plural?
I think the secondary, if they think Latrell is truly that number one guy, I think you got to shadow him against Ricky White. I mean, you have to have him guard him at all times, really, unless you have really a good scheme to kind of contain him in a zone. So Ricky White's definitely a guy you want to keep an eye on. He was 3rd in the country in receiving yards last year. People knew it was coming to him, and he still was cooking opposing defenses all year long, from September all the way to that guaranteed rate bowl against Kansas in December. So, but Ricky White isn't the only receiving threat on UNLV. They also return a 600-yard second option in Jacob DeJesus, who's a really small, fast guy, 5'7", 175, but one of the fastest players on the team that could also catch some of Houston's secondary off guard. So maybe that's a guy he's going to line up probably in the slot, a lot of different areas. So you're going to see some nickels and safeties on him throughout the game. And then they added a guy who started at the University of Texas in Casey Kane, who's a bit larger of a receiver. So I think Houston's secondary is going to have their hands full, not just Ricky White, but I think those other 2 receivers I just mentioned are really capable of getting a lot of yards and changing the tone of this game as well. So it's going to have to be a lot of lockdown defense. And I think that even more important than the secondary is getting to those quarterbacks, because Houston loses a good contingent of its pass rush last year. I think every player that had at least 3 sacks last year is gone. If you think, Nelson Caesar, Jamari Caldwell, who was all Big 12, and then David Owegbu, who came from Oklahoma for last year. All those guys are gone. So rush and coverage work together really well. You have to get to those quarterbacks and get pressure on them and force some tough throws, because these receivers are going to get open. I think that they're going to find their way.
Especially give them a long time. We've said quarterbacks plural a couple of times now, because at least one of Matthew Sluka or hajj-williams, and I guess maybe also Cam Friel, they've got options and they won't announce a starter. Now, last year's starter, when they went 9-5, did transfer to USC, ultimately to become a backup, which has drawn some question marks from a lot of people across the country. I don't mind it. I think, though, that I'm torn between who I think is better between hajj-williams and Matthew Sluka. They're kind of better at different things. Malik is more of throws the ball really well to the sidelines and a little bit more creative as a runner when things break down. Matthew Sluka is a guy you would draw up quarterback power for, and probably better at throwing it over the middle because he's got a cannon, right? I don't know how much you've gotten to break down film on these two. I know that you've got a lot of football you cover, and I've been watching a lot of football. What are you thinking as far as that quarterback dynamic? Is it too many cooks in the kitchen? I mean, what are you thinking with that?
I didn't really get to watch their play at FCS, but I've done some research on them this week, and I kind of agree with some of your assessments of there. But you can't ignore the fact that Matthew Sluka, he's a first-team FCS All-American, and I think that he is going to end up being the guy for UNLV. I mean, someone who's put together back-to-back 1,200-yard rushing seasons. That's like numbers that the top of the top quarterbacks do. The Jaden Daniels, maybe. The Jordan Lynch, if you remember that name, NIU, guys like Khalil Tate when he was at Arizona. That's the top of rushing numbers. So he's somebody who I think that could really get the Houston's defense off guard this week, when you have somebody who has that running ability in addition to covering all those receivers. And Sluka didn't have the completion percentages. hajj-williams wasn't as efficient. But one thing I noted was he doesn't throw interceptions. His touchdown to interception ratios are off the chart. He's throwing like 4 touchdowns for every interception at Holy Cross. And that's something that really impressed me. Quarterbacks that don't make costly errors and mistakes. So that's one thing that impresses me about Sluka. I think he's going to be the guy. I know Cam Friel has some experience with UNLV, although that was under a different coaching staff than Barry Odom's, and hajj-williams, also a longtime FCS starter. We could see multiple on Saturday, especially if UNLV stalls in a few early possessions. But I think Matthew Sluka is going to be the guy just because of what I've seen from him.
Well, and much like how Latrell McCutcheon is the guy marked up with Ricky White, we assume, right? It's his job to shut that down. A running quarterback they typically put on like the Mike linebacker. One of the coolest stories on Houston's roster is that Mike linebacker named Michael Batten. It's like a bajillion schools in 12 years. He's a journeyman of all journeymen. Again, guys you've covered up close and personally. What do you tell us about Michael and how that'll impact this job? And this is a tough job this weekend.
Oh, Michael's actually going to play the will, and they have Kendra Gant at the Mike linebacker. So Michael Batten started at the will linebacker in his first season at ULM in 2021, and then he moved to Mike last year. And it makes his statistics look better. I mean, his best run defense is some of his best feature. He's going up, crashing the box, going against the running back the whole time. But he said that his number one improvement this season has been his coverage skills. So he's ready to play that will linebacker. And he says he's one of the fastest players on the team and has one of the fastest 30-yard dashes that are on the team. But yeah, Michael Batten, he's really talented player. He sees a game like a quarterback, and that's because he was a quarterback. He walked on to Louisiana, an FBS team where his father played when he started college, and that didn't really work out for him. He tried some different colleges along the way. He went to Houston Christian. He went to the community, the JUCO route. Then he ended up at ULM, where they tried to tell him to transition to defense, and he found out he was better at linebacker than quarterback. But he But I think seeing the game as a quarterback and knowing what happens all that pre-snap, that I think that really helps Michael Batten see the game as a linebacker, and that's something that can help him improve his coverage skills more quickly. So we talked about all the receivers and stuff this week. He's going to be somebody who's going to drop back and cover some guys. He's not going to play the same role he played at ULM last year. I think Kendra Gant's going to be the one really in charge of stopping the run, but Michael Batten's going to be one of those guys that's kind of on the outsides more. So if a quarterback does, like Sluka, make his way to the outside to the boundary, you'll see Batten trying to chase him there and get a tackle after that prolific 90 tackle season he had with the Warhawks last year.
He certainly reads things better than I read my Excel sheet when I get crisscrossing. So I appreciate the correction. I want to talk more about this game and previewing this game in a second. But if you're looking to make the weekend more interesting, the place you got to do it's at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel at different points on this program. We got something a little bit different to offer you now, though, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account, easy enough, and a current form of payment that you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the MLB. Also, if as we're winding the summer down, like I want to have more of the summer bod next year. I know I mentioned, I think in pre-show, I've got a 14-month-old. I'm very much rocking the dad bod these days. And if you want to meet up with me and meet your wellness goals, you got to go check out Factor and get started now. Get started now for next summer. Factor meal prep is the best way to get things done. All kinds of cool and healthy meal options. Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you always have time to enjoy nutritious, great lasting meals. With 35 different meals and 60 different add-ons to choose from every week, you'll have all kinds of new flavors to explore and never get bored. You can make your day nutritious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy and nutritious options. I keep saying nutritious funny. Enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 different menu preferences, help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply just eat well balanced. Head to factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 and use code lockedoncollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code lockedoncollege50 at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 to get 50% off your first box and 20% off your next month while your subscription lasts. All right, back with Steve Helwick again, talking about Houston UNLV this weekend. We've talked a lot about Houston's defense, but the truth is, when you're playing the go-go offense, you're going to have to score some points. Elite defense is going to give up some points to Ricky White in that offense, right? And so I think Donovan's going to have a pretty strong year this year. I've said as much, and I said that I think he might have gotten ragged a little bit for some stuff last year that might not all have been his fault. He is the leader of the team and leader of the offense as the quarterback. What do you foresee out of Donovan this fall, or this week, I should say?
I think Donovan Smith's ready to take that leap into one of the top half of quarterbacks in the Big 12. I mean, he could be one of the better ones in the conference this year. We saw him shine a bit at Texas Tech, and I think by all accounts, I think he had a good season last year for the most part. I mean, there were some games where you saw Donovan Smith and you saw him really reach this potential of what he was capable of. There was that 3-game stretch in late September and to late October with Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Texas, where he looked sensational, had 11 touchdowns, 1 interception in that span, was completing passes, several games above 70% completion. And he wasn't just throwing simple check down throws. He was really going downfield. You think back to that West Virginia game where he willed the Cougars to victory. He completed like his last 14 to 16 passes or something, including that Hail Mary. Yeah. So Donovan Smith, I think he had that torn labrum in this throwing shoulder that held him out of much of spring ball. So he's on kind of a pitch count even going up to fall camp. But Willie Fritz says that he's 100% now. And I think we're ready to see what he's capable of in this opening week. I think UNLV's biggest weakness is their passing defense. So I think that's an area Donovan Smith's going to be able to shine when he drops back on Saturday.
Well, and I appreciate you contextualizing. I really thought he got a bad rap last year. I think people maybe wanted someone else coming in the transfer portal, or maybe didn't. Full disclosure, I thought he was going to run more. I don't mean to say that I was like not surprised by how little he took off and ran the football as the quarterback last year, but I think people were quick to point. I mean, it's football. When things go south, you can blame the coach and you can blame the quarterback, and they fired the coach, right? Like those things happen fairly regularly. But I think he had a pretty solid year last year and could set himself up for a pretty good one this year. They're playing some pretty good teams on the schedule to set that up. You mentioned, though, that the secondary is probably the weakest part of UNLV's defense. I think the strongest part of Houston's offense is their wide receiver room, because they got like 8 dudes that can play, like really play. And they're led by Joseph Manjack, and he's the name I think that everyone, both because it's fun to say and because it's going to be a lot of catches. What do you think of when you see this receiver room and what they can do, even as we're heading towards what might be a more run-heavy offense?
Yeah, Willie Fritz teams have run more in the past, and this isn't going to be the air raid we saw really under Dana Holgerson's, but the receivers are still going to be important, and I think it's a deep group. The only issue I'm seeing right now is who's the number one guy? I mean, you lose Matthew Golden to Texas. Sam Brown, that was a huge departure after the spring game, because with Sam Brown in this unit, I thought that receiving core could have been one of the best in the Big 12, because there was a good time last year, probably halfway through the season, Sam Brown was a Big 12's leading receiver. He was frequented so often and made a lot of plays.
I don't mean to cut you off. That one hurt. That one hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And I get it. Go make your money, kid. That hurt. That hurt a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but even after Sam Brown, you look and it's a group that's deep with experience. Joseph Manjack, he's the number one guy by accounts of statistics he's put in the past, but perhaps there's somebody who has that Sam Brown-like leap that he had from 2022 to 2023 in the receiving core. And I think the name I'm most excited with is Jonah Wilson. I think he only caught 2 passes last year. Injury kept him out most of the year. But Jonah Wilson, he had that touchdown against Oklahoma State. He was a highly touted recruit. He's someone who I think has a lot of untapped potential in him. Houston was really excited when they first got him. And I think with a full slate of health, he's going to be somebody who's going to be, you need to watch this year. Then Boogie Johnson's another name, known most for that Hail Mary catch, stepping up late in that game when Matthew Golden got hurt against West Virginia. Boogie Johnson, he's somebody who I think can thrive out of the slot. He played against UCF and started that game last year, posted some numbers in 2 starts last year. And I think one of the most intriguing things about Houston's receiving core, which I've heard from some of the receivers, they're lining up in different areas this year. Last year, a lot of the guys, they kind of played at the same positions, whether it's an X position, Z position, or the slot. This year, they're all working their skills out at different positions, which can catch defenses off guards, because it expands your route tree, expands the potential of what receivers can do. So I think that's one thing that's really interesting in Willie Fritz's offense this year. And then behind them, you just have those transfers. Mekhi Muse from Georgia, he's one of those small, fast guys that I think has a lot of potential, especially on punt return. And then the 2 Tulsa transfers, which were much necessary additions after losing Sam Brown and Mikal Harrison Pilot after the spring game.
Well, and it's funny because like the starting lineup right now, I guess on the depth chart has Manjack, Jonah Wilson, Boogie Johnson. Mm-hmm. You have Manjack, the Iron Man, and then you've got Jonah Wilson and Boogie Johnson, who don't have a whole lot of statistics from last year, but they both have touchdowns of 50+ yards, right? Like they do have impressive plays to hold on to from last year. Mekhi Muse, a national champion, is a backup. Kobe Young is one of the highest touted freshmen on the roster. He's having trouble making the depth chart. You question, do you redshirt him or not? He's so talented, you don't want to, but you also know that like that's just the most crowded room on the roster right now, right? And so that offers some balance back and forth there on what you do. I want to talk about Parker Jenkins for the last 2 minutes here, because I've loved Parker Jenkins. He was a great recruit. I don't mean to say he wasn't. But when that whole thing went down and Alton McCaskill decided to transfer, there was all the Twitter beefing and all the whatever, da-da-da. And Parker Jenkins, 18-year-old, like still going to prom. like whatever. And he just tweets out something to the effect of, "New era starts now," and a picture of himself in Houston Cougars uniform. And I was just like, that's perfect. That's it. That's what I want. That's what I want from a running back. That kind of confidence. He sets up for a pretty big year this year, though, in all seriousness. Running offense, he's the returning running back, slotted in as the starter. knows the Big 12. I thought was very impressive last year. Backup Rashawn Sanford, also an impressive redshirt freshman. What do you think about that room? Am I excited? Am I wrong to be more excited even about the running backs?
I think it's good. Even Tony Mathis Jr., he tore his ACL. He was West Virginia's leading rusher 2 years ago. But even without Mathis, I still think the group has potential with those three names that you named. Parker Jenkins had a really good true freshman campaign, just like Alton McCaskill did a few years ago. We never really got to see McCaskill's follow-up act, but I'm kind of excited to see if Parker Jenkins with that continuity gets better. And also, I mentioned earlier, the Willie Fritz offense, it's an offense that wants to run the ball until they have to throw it pretty much. And that's what it was at Tulane. You look at the last 2 years at Tulane and you can see why all these running backs are licking their chops.
We saw Tajay Spears in person. We saw that happen.
Yeah, Tajay Spears and Mekhi Hughes both had over 1,300 yards like in their last 2 seasons under Willie Fritz. He's somebody who can make his running backs really productive. So, and Sanford, we don't know much about because we haven't seen him, but that's a guy where all the players say, watch out for Rashawn Sanford this year. He's really on the come up. And then you have Stacey Sneed, who's had some really good yards per carry averages in his time there. But my biggest concern with the unit of the running backs is the line blocking for them. Houston didn't really go out and get a bunch of linemen from the transfer. You have one starting transfer and Jake Wiley on the right side, someone who had starting experience at Colorado in the past. But this is last year's backups. Outside of right guard Tank Jenkins, the other 3 starters are basically last year's backups emerging. So you lose a second round pick in Patrick Paul.
It's interesting because it's last year's backups, especially at guards and tackles. I would point out that Demetrius Hunter, Pancake Hunter, was a crazy highly touted recruit, is just a sophomore. So there could be some just growing it. You don't just start very many freshmen on the offensive line either, right? So there could be some growing into that. But it certainly feels awkward to see last year's backup tackle David Ndukwe starting this year. What's going on there?
It could work down the road, and I think it might, but it's just the first few weeks, then the offensive line's not gel together well. One person misses an assignment on a play, it affects the whole line, everything goes through. So that is, I think, the X factor of this game is how the offensive line performs, because there's so many new starters that don't really have too much experience to go about them on that unit. So I think especially that left side of the line that doesn't have much starting experience, they really need to be sound on their assignments if they want to give Donovan Smith time to throw and get Houston hasn't really in the past few years established a good running game from the get-go in the first quarter, second quarter. And I think that's really important to get those running backs moving 6-7 yards down the field early.
I'm predicting a Cougar win. I'm on the books now, I think, at 35-28. I think both offenses are going to score some points. I think the deal is that UNLV's defense is going to be on the field a lot and not really going to be able to survive the whole game. Can I ask you for prediction, Steve?
Yes.
What you got?
My preview. My preview prediction, which I'll hold to it, is I said Houston 31, UNLV 24. I think UNLV will hold a second half lead in this game. I think Houston's going to come back, and I think that they're going to have a very late game-winning touchdown drive to win this game. I think it's going to be close. I don't think it's going to be super high scoring above the 30s. I think a lot of these week 1 games, it's offense is still working out the kinks. We saw that a bit in UTSA Houston last year with a 17-14 final score. Even the year before with UTSA Houston. Don't be fooled by all those overtimes. That was, I think, 21-21 going into the first overtime. So we've seen these low-scoring openers in the past few years, and they've been stressful openers for Houston fans, I'll have to say. And this one might be another one if our score predictions are accurate. So, yeah, I do think that Houston emerges late. I think the home field is going to help. It really helped them keep the game close against Texas last year. And I think it's going to be a great crowd at TDECU on Saturday night. Everyone's hyped to see Willie Fritz in this new look program.
Everyone's excited to start the Fritz era. Energy's around the program. Good vibes all the way around. I think some of that mojo is going to rub off on the team as well. That's Steve Helwick, Houston beat writer for Underdog. There's a bunch of other college football writing as well. Best way I know to find your work is at @S_Helwick on Twitter/X. Is there a better way, or is that the best way, Steve?
Yeah, definitely Twitter. That's where I post all my stuff. So, yeah, and I'll be covering the Houston UNLV game Saturday, so follow along there. So excited to be there.
As well as a handful of other college football games we're talking about this weekend that you're covering. So all things college football with a focus on Houston. If that's your vibe, Steve Helwick's your guy. Thank you so much for making Locked On Coogs your first listen For a second listen, I'm going to recommend Locked On Houston Sports. Locked On Coogs is primarily Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, our Houston Cougars, every day. Go Cougs.